Hey guys, welcome to Bible Scribe. Thank you for joining me. I'm going to do a video today on Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel 2. And this is the dream of the statue that has gold, silver, bronze, and iron parts. And I think that in this video you're going to hear some things about this prophecy that you probably didn't think of before, some ways of looking at it. We're going to use visuals to do that. And so we're going to go through it, and it's actually going to be very easy to understand. Some people think that the prophecies of Daniel, I think, are very complicated or something, and I think it's because of the ideas that people bring to the book of Daniel. It's not because Daniel is hard to understand. This particular prophecy, Daniel is going to tell us the vision and interpret it for the king Nebuchadnezzar. And so we get to listen to all that. It's kind of silly to think that he would do it in a way that would confuse the king. So we can assume that this prophecy and its interpretation as given in chapter 2 of Daniel are easy for us to understand, and they will be. So we're going to look at this together. Now, if you remember the story of chapter 2 of Daniel, I'm going to bring it up on the screen. Literally the first 30 verses of the chapter are leading up to the actual sharing of the vision by Daniel. This is the vision that Nebuchadnezzar has, and he won't tell anyone what the vision was, but he tells all his magicians and sorcerers that they have to not only tell him what the vision was, but also then interpret it. So none of them can do it. They're scared. He says he's going to kill anyone that comes to him but can't tell him the vision. And so Daniel prays to God, and God gives him both the vision that Nebuchadnezzar had and the interpretation of that vision. So here in chapter 2, verse 31 is where it actually starts, and this is Daniel telling the king what his vision was. So let's read this few verses. It's just 5 verses here, really quick. Thou, O king, sawest, and behold, a great image. This great image, whose brightness was excellent, stood before thee, and the form was terrible. The image's head was of fine gold, his breast and arms of silver, his belly and thighs of brass, his legs of iron, his feet part of iron and part of clay. Thou sawest till that a stone was cut out without hands, which smote the image upon his feet that were of iron and clay, and brake them to pieces. Then was the iron, the clay, the brass, the silver, and the gold broken to pieces together, and became like the chaff of the summer threshing floors. And the wind carried them away, so that no place was found for them. And the stone that smote the image became a great mountain, and filled the whole earth. So this is the dream that God showed to Daniel that he had previously given to Nebuchadnezzar. And so it's this statue, and you've heard this story many times. If you're a student of the Bible, you've probably studied this chapter many times. Again, I think we're going to look at some things that will help you understand it even better and more clearly than ever before. So I'm going to change now to show you a visual. We're going to start looking at a visual of this statue. Let me hide that. So here's the statue. You've probably even seen this particular photo or drawing of the statue. I think it's public domain, so I don't mind borrowing it. But so we see here, and according to the passage we just read, the head is gold, the arms and shoulders are silver, the belly and thighs are bronze, and the legs and feet are iron, and the toes and feet themselves are iron mixed with clay. And so, we can divide it up kind of like that. And what we're going to do is we're going to fill in those areas with the interpretation, but Daniel's going to give that to us. So we don't have to guess at what that's going to be. We don't have to go to other parts of Scripture to understand that. Daniel's going to tell us the interpretation, and it's a good thing to remember too. In a lot of places in the Old Testament, and a lot of even scholars and pastors make this mistake. They don't realize that a particular prophecy is interpreted in the following chapters or verses after the prophecy. So they go into the prophecy trying to interpret it themselves, and they get off on all kinds of crazy ideas that aren't appropriate because the interpretation is actually given just after the prophecy. So just a warning, don't make that mistake. This one is interpreted for us. So let me jump back over to our passage, and we will look at the interpretation real quick and read that, and then we will fill in that graphic. This is the dream, and we will tell the interpretation thereof to the king. Thou, O king, art a king of kings, talking about Nebuchadnezzar here. For the God of heaven hath given thee a kingdom, power, strength, and glory. And wheresoever the children of men dwell, the beasts of the field, the fowls of heaven, he hath given into thine hand, and hath made thee ruler over them all. Thou art this head of gold. So this, we can at least infer from this that God had given Nebuchadnezzar a special rule, a special kingdom for a special time. And of course, he placed the Israelites in that kingdom because he had captured them from Jerusalem and brought them into Babylon. Hence the case of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego in other parts of Daniel. But this is the status we're at right now. And continuing on, he says to Nebuchadnezzar, after thee shall rise another kingdom inferior to thee, and another third kingdom of brass. So the kingdom inferior would have been the silver that was mentioned prior, and then a third one of brass, which shall bear rule over the earth, over all the earth. And the fourth kingdom shall be strong as iron. For as much as the iron breaketh in pieces and subdues all things, and as iron that breaketh all these, it shall break in pieces and bruise. Meaning this kingdom would be strong and break others. Verse 41, and whereas thou sawest the feet and toes, part of the potter's clay, and part of iron, the kingdom shall be divided. But there shall be in it the strength of iron, for as much as thou saw iron mixed with miry clay. So again, to reiterate here, just the feet and toes are the clay and iron mixed. And he says here that it means the kingdom will be a divided type of kingdom or fragmented. And there would be in it some strength in places and some weakness in places. And he says that there in that verse. Verse 42, and as the toes of the feet were part of iron and part of clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong, partly broken. And whereas thou saw iron mixed with miry clay, they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. In the days of these kings, note that word, we'll come back to that, shall the God of heaven set up a kingdom which shall never be destroyed. The kingdom which will never be destroyed. This is Christ's kingdom, right? And the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, for it shall stand forever. For as much as thou sawest that the stone was cut out of the mountain without hands, and it brake in pieces the iron, the brass, the clay, the silver, and the gold, the great God hath made known to the king what shall come to pass hereafter. And the dream is certain, and the interpretation thereof sure. So that is all of the information the Bible specifically gives us about this dream and this interpretation. So now we're going to start plotting the points on our graphic so that the visual always brings more ability to understand to more people. Some people learn by just reading. Some people see it and they get it. Some other people have to experience things before they understand or think through them. So that's why I'm doing this graphic. We're going to put all this information on it, and it's going to make a lot of sense when we do that. So let me pull the graphic up again. Here's our statue of the vision. And so we will start with the first section, and that is the head. And it is gold. And he said we read in the scripture that the gold, the head, was Nebuchadnezzar's kingdom of Babylon. So we can put that in. Gold was Babylon, and Nebuchadnezzar, obviously the king at that time. We found this in verses 32 and 37 to 38 is where it talks about this golden kingdom of Nebuchadnezzar's. And so we have to, assume, because he tells us this is a succession of kingdoms. What kingdom came about after the Babylonian kingdom and was essentially equivalent in size and scope? It took over the known world at the time. Well, that would have been Medo-Persia. And that was found in verses 32 and 39 for us. But this is the following kingdom. So to get an idea too of, we'll go into time frames later, but just to know this was the next massive major kingdom in that part of the earth, the known world of the time. And so it was Nebuchadnezzar in Babylon. They were succeeded by Medo-Persia. Now the next great kingdom that came along after Medo-Persia, and there was definitive events that switched between these, that made these kingdoms succeed one another. We'll go over those two just briefly. But the next great kingdom was Greece, and they took over the known world for a period of years. And that was this bronze section, which is Greece, was mentioned in verses 32 and 39. And then we come to the iron legs. The next great nation that came about and took over the known world after Greece was none other than Rome. So we have Rome, and that was in verses 33 and verse 40 that it was mentioned. So just know that so far we have looked at these and come to these conclusions of what kingdoms these are. And I will tell you this too, this agrees with 99.999% of all Bible theologians, that these are the kingdoms that were meant and intended by God in the vision that Daniel interpreted. And so we can be pretty confident in this, and we're not, hurting anybody's feelings at all. And then we got to mention at the bottom, the feet were iron mixed with clay, right? And it doesn't actually say, if you go back and you look at what we read, it doesn't say this is a new kingdom. It says this is a part of the iron kingdom. It's just that the feet, particularly the toes, if you remember what we read, were iron mixed with clay. But the feet and toes were iron and clay. And this is also Rome. This is not talking about something after Rome or some other thing. Most, people will say this is a different kingdom, but our scriptures didn't tell us that. It mentioned kingdom after kingdom, and as it was saying this kingdom, then that kingdom, it mentioned Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome, but it did not say again that the iron mixed with clay would be a separate kingdom. It was part of Rome. It was just that it was, remember, if you remember what we read, it said it was divided, it was fragmented, it was partly strong and partly weak. And that speaks specifically to the state of Rome, the Roman Empire in the first century, because it was very divided against itself. There were civil wars throughout the first century. Different Caesars had different power struggles, and it was a very flimsy, scary time for the Roman Empire, particularly when Nero committed suicide. Many people thought that the empire was falling apart, and that was in the middle of the first century. So this was a very crazy time, and this metaphor of iron mixed with clay, and some strong, some weak, and just things that don't mix very good, it was very indicative of the nation of Rome in the first century. The iron and clay was, by the way, mentioned in verses 33 and 41 through 44. There's actually quite a few verses there on the iron and clay and the toes and the feet. So that's what we have there. Now, To give a little perspective, I think what really opened my mind to understanding when I came to Daniel, and it took me a long time before I realized I needed to do this, but I started looking at the time frames involved with these nations. And so I went back up here to Babylon and I was like, I want to read history and find out when Babylon was in power. How long was this? And so I did that. I looked, and it essentially, you could say that Nebuchadnezzar's reign and everything started around 607 BC, 607, when the Assyrian Empire, who had ruled over Babylon for a long period of time, they were finally destroyed and dismantled by Nebuchadnezzar, his predecessor, Nabopolassar, I believe. And they actually took control of Babylon again, and that was around the time of 607 BC. And so then we look at Medo-Persia. When did they come into power and defeat Babylon? Well, about 550 BC, Cyrus of Medo-Persia invaded Babylon and took over. So that would have been the turning point when Medo-Persia took over the known world from Babylon. So what about Greece? In the year 331 BC, there was a battle called the Battle of Gaugamela. I think I say that right. But it was the turning point where Greece took over from the Medes and Persians. And so you can look that up in history books, but it does seem to be definitive. That is when it kind of switched over to Grecian control over the known world versus Medo-Persian. So then in Rome, for Rome, we have at 180 or 146 BC rather, the Battle of Corinth was a decisive victory where they took over from Greece. So this is really the start of the Roman Empire as it started to conquer the known world and gain massive amounts of control over Palestine and the known world and the surrounding areas. So once we've got those dates now, we can say, now we can figure out how long each of these periods were. And this is going to be interesting. This is going to be where we start to see some things that most people miss when they come to this prophecy. So this is very telling. If we look up here at the time frame of Babylon with Nebuchadnezzar and the gold head of the statue, this time frame is about 150 years. And then if we go to the next, we add that up. For Medo-Persia, they were in control about 220 years. This is all before Christ. Greece was then in control of the known world for about 190 years. And now we have to look at Rome and say, how long were they in control as far as this prophecy is concerned? Now, this is where a lot of people diverge. And so you have a lot of people that believe that the end of this prophecy has something to do with the future, our future from now. And I actually used to think that way. I realize now that I didn't really know a lot about these prophecies then, but as I've grown and learned more and more and understood a little better, but we're going to look at this graphically in a way that will help us understand what was meant by this prophecy and what it might look like if we try to put this out in the future. So instead of going any further with this graphic, I'm going to change the picture just a little bit so we can look at it a different way. So let me take that away and start to look. That's not what I wanted to look at. Let's see here. All right, so if we took our statue and we turn it sideways, and what we're really doing now is we're creating a timeline, okay? And this is important because we want to see, like, as God gave this vision to Nebuchadnezzar of successive kingdoms, what was the real time frame we were looking at? Was it the next 500-600 years of human history from him outward? Or was it something a lot greater? Because if some of this prophecy was fulfilled in our future, then that time frame grows to like 2,000-3,000 years, okay? So we're going to look at that and try to visualize what that would look like. you know, if we laid our statue out this way and did what we just did in the vertical statue, we had Rome, we had, I'm going backwards, but we have Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome in the different sections on this chart. And then again, we had said that each of the time frames we had identified were 150, 220, 190 years. And then Rome, we were like, how long does this occur? Because again, a lot of people say that this reference to Rome is a very ambiguous reference, that it spans thousands of years, and the ending, meaning the culmination of the vision where a stone that's built without hands, that's extracted from the mountain, that's built without hands, and thrown at the feet of the statue and crumbles the whole thing, they would say that's out in our future, which makes this 3,000 years of a time frame, right? So we have to say, wow, well, if that's true, then the scale of our statue doesn't work at all, right? I mean, each of these makes sense. It's 150 to 200 years, and they're just these very, regular interval time periods. So we would expect Rome, to be about 250 years or something like that, maybe, based on the visual we have right here, right? It's just a statue. There's 4 sections. So what would it look like then if we tried to stretch this thing out and put some of the events at the end of the vision in the future? We would have to make the time period for Rome very long, right? So let's do that. Let's have our statue lay out, and I'll make him small, and then now I'm going to extend his legs so that they're long enough to accommodate the time period it would take to make this something in our future. So again, I'll put our lines back on it. Just the same lines we had before, just on the statue in the correct places, with a very large time frame for the legs, as some people like to interpret this. We have Babylon, Medo-Persia, Greece, and Rome. And we have the time frames of each. And so we have, 150, 220, 190 of Greece, and then of Rome. Again, we are questioning, how long is it? Is it, like some people say, is it 2,000 years? Is it 2,500 years? Is it 3,000 years? Those people generally would say they don't know, but it's very long, and the events at the end where the stone crushes the feet of the statue and obliterates all the kingdoms is in our future. So it would have to be way out there. So we have a long period of time with this arrow, and then we have to say, is this 2020 at the end? This is modern day. It's our future, right? That would happen in. If those people interpretations are correct, then it would be our future from modern day. So, they would say this is at least 2,200 plus years until Christ is going to destroy this quasi-Roman kingdom. Okay, that's the way they kind of word those things. Quasi-Roman, because it's not the Holy Roman Empire of the 1st century. It's out in our future. It's some amalgamation that will be reformed towards the end of time. And it's in our future. And so that's what that would look like. And so when I did this exercise and I looked at these time frames, I thought to myself, why would God give a vision to Nebuchadnezzar that would have his kingdom and the succeeding 3 kingdoms and all the time frame periods be close to 200 years except for the last one? And why would it then be 2,500 years? Why would it be anything like that? Because that makes this graphic, it makes the concepts wrong. It breaks the vision. It breaks the consistency of the vision. So I can't do that. When I saw that, I used to come at this vision, this prophecy, with those kind of eyes, thinking of it this way. And I didn't understand this. This to me did not make sense. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to go back to the way we originally had it and start looking at it in a little bit different way. So instead of making that kingdom of iron, the Roman kingdom, something that extends out ad infinitum because we want to place the events of the stone crushing the feet of the statue in the future. We're not going to do that because we have that stone, and we know because of the scripture, the way it was talked about, the stone, the foundation cornerstone, right? This is the cornerstone, and it is the stone that is cut without hands. It is Jesus Christ himself, all right? And it mentions a mountain as well. It's hewn from a mountain. And so I actually brought this into the picture too. There's this mountain in prophecy. What do we almost always see as the mountain in prophecy? It's Mount Zion, right? So I at least can make the assumption that we might be talking about that. But we have this iron kingdom of Rome, and we're questioning the years on it. So let's look at that very quickly. If instead of saying we don't know the years, if instead perhaps this vision was giving pretty equivalent time periods, then if we make that equivalent and we look at Christ coming when he first came, he was a baby, he was born of a Virgin Mary, he taught that his kingdom had come. He was on earth and he taught, he was on earth 30 years or so, and he taught for 3 solid years throughout the Jewish nation, the Jewish cities of Galilee, because he wanted the Jews to come back as he was establishing his kingdom. They were to be the first fruits. And so he spent that time. If that was the focal point of this prophecy, then the Rome he's talking about here is probably more like 220 years, because that would have been between that Battle of Corinth in 146 BC and the time of Jesus Christ in the first century when he came. And so another thing that's interesting when we start thinking about the iron and the clay mixed, well, this means something too, and that has to do with this concept we talked about of the division of the kingdom. There was civil wars all through the first century. But when we look at the toes, now this is the only part of this prophecy where I'm going to reference something else in the book of Daniel. But think about toes. How many are there? We have 10 toes, right? And it does mention these in the verses we read. It mentions the toes being mixed iron, clay, and the toes being 10 echoes something else in Daniel. And there is another prophecy in Daniel where 10 is mentioned. And you know what those 10 are? They're kings. They're even spoken of in Daniel as kings. There's 10 kings, and it's all part of these prophecies that God is giving to Nebuchadnezzar and to Daniel. And so the 10 kings are the 10 Caesars that led through the Roman Empire up through the first century. And this is why this matches so perfectly, and why this would have been valid and valuable information for King Nebuchadnezzar, because he saw in this vision his usefulness as a tool of God. Because remember, in the end of chapter 2, what does Nebuchadnezzar do? He praises God as the Most High God, who knows everything, even about man's dreams and the interpretations thereof. He gives God credit for being the Most High God. So he understands in this vision his importance and God's plan for the next 600 or 700 years until the coming of Jesus Christ, who is this stone cut without hands, who destroys the feet, the iron and clay mixed feet of Rome, and obliterates this entire statue. Right? Because when Jesus comes, it further destabilizes Rome. And by the year 70 AD, God had judged Israel, but he had established the church. And this was all the Christians, Jew and Gentile. And so the church, being the kingdom of Christ established by this cornerstone, was what was going to then, if you remember in our passage, it was going to grow and fill the entire earth. That's the church. That's us, those who believe in Jesus Christ and his Father, the Most High God. And so this makes this vision all come together. And it's so beautiful. But this is why, this is how it's important to Nebuchadnezzar. If we had gone back and kept our picture of the statue that stretched out into our future, then this would have been unimportant to those who received the vision. It would have been irrelevant. They didn't need to know that something was going to happen 2,500 years ahead of them in the future. They would not have cared in the least. But because that's not the case, because God gave Nebuchadnezzar this vision, he was able to understand the importance and the role his kingdom played in this master plan of the Most High God and how he was instrumental in that. And so that's why this vision is important and how it makes sense for both him and for Daniel and for the coming kingdom of Jesus Christ, which would last forever and would grow to fill the entire earth. As the Roman kingdom, by the way, after the first century, the Roman kingdom was in steady decline till 500 or so AD. And it just never was the same. After all exactly what it talks about, the iron and the clay mix, there was all the civil wars, all the infighting, all the destabilization of their country. It weakened and weakened and weakened till the Roman Empire was not a thing anymore. Not like it was, for sure, with those first 10 Caesars. By the way, the 10 Caesars are these Caesars, in case you want to look them up and learn more about how each of them came into power. It's Julius, it's Augustus, Tiberius, Caligula, Claudius, Nero, Galba, Otho, Vitellius, and Vespasian. Just as for instance, Galba, Otho, and Vitellius each ruled for only a month or two in the same year. That's how unstable the Empire of Rome was. And of course, that was right after Nero had committed suicide. And Nero had been seen as a horrible emperor and essentially a madman. Even by his own Roman people, they thought he had gone mad by the time he died. So this shows you that how accurate this prophecy was, and exactly that it meant exactly what it said. It was these specific kingdoms and time periods that would follow Nebuchadnezzar to give him confidence in what God was doing. And it actually turned his heart toward God, and praise God that Daniel was a part of that too, and got to experience it. Some of those things, like, I wish I could have been there. It would have been so incredible. I think that is it. That is all I have for this video, but I think this graphic speaks for itself. I think we've made good work of this, and that this prophecy in Daniel chapter 2 makes, hopefully for you, it makes a lot more sense and has cleared some things up. Because I know I always struggled with this growing up. I struggled with some of these prophecies. Every teacher you hear talk about it may say something just a little different. But do know that this interpretation, where these kingdoms were very specific time periods leading up to the time of Jesus Christ in the first century, is a very well-studied and well-understood interpretation of the prophecy. And in fact, what I feel is that you're not even interpreting the prophecy. You're just looking at it through the eyes of Nebuchadnezzar and Daniel, and you're being honest with the text instead of trying to add some millennia of time periods into the prophecy that wouldn't make sense for the hearers. So let's not do that when we go to prophecy, but let's try to be true to what it's saying and not bring our baggage with us as we come. So thank you for joining me. I hope you got a lot out of this. Like and subscribe if you can, and God bless. Take care.